So I have my two front pieces with laying so that the pattern is going in opposite directions, radiating out from the center. And I have my two pieces of interfacing. So now I'm ready to apply my interfacing to my front pieces of fabric. So I'm going to apply them in what's going to become the center of my pillow. So I'm going to turn them wrong side up, and I'm going to apply the interfacing to the edge. Remember to put this bumpy side down so that it sticks to the fabric. And I'm going to do that to both pieces. Okay, now I have the interfacing applied to both pieces. Now I'm going to take my fabric and I'm going to use the edge of the interfacing as a fold line, and I'm going to fold that back, making sure that it lays nice and smooth and that the edges of the fabric are lined up square. And I'm going to press that. And this is going to become a self-facing for the front of the pillow where the buttons are going to go. And I'm going to do that for both pieces. So now we're ready to begin the first part of sewing on our pillow. What we want to do first is at the edge of the piece that we folded back to make the facing at the front of the pillow, we want to come in 1/4 of an inch from this edge and do a row of top stitching. What that's going to do is it's going to keep our facing laying flat, and it's also going to provide a decorative row of stitching on the top of our pillow. So for this, I have chosen to use a colored thread, a decorative thread, that's going to actually add contrast to my pillow. So I'm going to use a regular stitch length. I'm going to back stitch, and I am going to sew with the top stitching at about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of my fabric. So I'm back stitching, and then I'm going to use a regular stitch, plain stitch, top stitching all the way down the fabric. When I get to the end, I'm going to back stitch to finish my seam. And I'm going to do that to both front pieces. Okay, so now that I'm done, I have a row of decorative top stitching that is on the top of my pillow, and I have made a seam about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the self-facing to hold that back. So now we're ready to put the buttonholes in for our 3 buttons that we're going to put on. So our pillow is 15 inches, and we're going to have 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on each side, which means that our finished length of our pillow is going to be 14.5 inches, and we want our buttons evenly distributed in that section. So we are going to divide. We're going to put 1 button in the middle, and then we're going to put 1 button equally spaced from that. So to do that, I need to have 4 equal spaces of that 14.5 inches. So 14.5 divided by 4 is 3 5/8 inches. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark my first buttonhole in the center. So I'm going to go from the edge of my fabric to the center, which is 7.5 inches, and I'm going to put a pencil mark there. Then from that, I'm going to measure 3 5/8 inches, and I'm going to put a pencil mark that direction, and I'm going to measure 3 5/8 to put a pencil mark for my 3rd button. Okay, now that's the center of our buttons. Then we need to measure for our buttonhole. And if you remember, your buttonhole is the diameter of your button. So my button is about 3/4 of an inch. And then it is also the thickness of your button. Mine is about 1/8 of an inch. So my buttonholes need to be 7/8 of an inch in length. Okay, so I'm going to mark 7/8 of an inch on my hem gauge. And I'm going to center that where the center of my buttonhole is halfway in between my measurements. And I'm going to put a pencil mark at each end. Okay. Then the other thing I want to do is I want to make sure that my buttonhole, which is going to go with the length of my pillow, is halfway in between my stitching line and my fold. So that is 2 inches. So I want my buttonhole to be centered at 1 inch. So I'm going to put a couple marks at 1 inch in those markings that we did, marking the edges of our buttonholes. Okay. So to put the buttonholes in, we have our buttonhole marked the beginning and the end with our pencil, and we have our 1 inch mark so that we can line up the center of our buttonhole. So what we want to do is you want to put the needle in so that it lines up with your 1 inch mark, and then you're either going to line up the needle with the back end of your buttonhole or the front end of your buttonhole, depending upon which way your buttonhole is stitched by your machine. So if your machine starts at the back and comes down the front, stitches across, stitches back up, and then tacks the end, then you want to line it up with the back one. But if your machine starts the buttonhole in the front and stitches across, back, across, and back up, then you want to line up with the front line. So mine stitches starting at the back, so I'm going to line up the needle with the back end of the buttonhole and the 1 inch mark. Okay. Once I have that lined up, then I'm going to allow my machine to stitch the buttonhole. Okay, then we're going to pull it out and we are going to move it down in a line again for the other two buttonholes. And then you're going to do your third buttonhole. Once you have your buttonholes in, then you're ready to clip the buttonholes open. So remember, you fold it in half, take your scissors, snip between the two stitches, and go to the edges. Okay, and we're going to do that for each of the buttonholes.